Buddy.
Hey everybody, welcome to our stream.
Hello. Yes. Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. We're Effective Artistry. I'm Brandon Tessers. I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy. And with me, as always, is Cecil. Together and with some other folks, we are Effective Artistry. And we're here to not do therapy for an hour. We're here to chat. I don't know why I'm like having a harder time explaining this thing that we've done every week for like 5 months. Yeah. We're here to have a conversation. So anybody who's here in chat, please, the more people are asking questions and talking, the better everything works for us. So we pick a theme every week. The theme this week is ending things on time. But we do that as we'll get into why. We pick the theme every week just to make it easier for us to like get some questions prepared in advance and for people to know, what things they might want to talk about so that chat doesn't have to like jump right off the top and ask questions. It does not mean that that's the only thing that we're going to be talking about. If you have any other questions or any thoughts about anything, we'll go where we go. Cecil and I both have ADHD. We are going to wander where the conversation wanders. So having said all that, we're in our new offices. I was in our new offices last week, but Cecil was not. So what about ever actually finishing anything? Well, that will probably come up a lot today with the ending on time discussion. Cecil is laughing. We're both a little bit sweaty because we were just like everything that's in the background. I don't know why we put all this work into like setting it all up to look all nice, and now I'm immediately just ruining the illusion and saying we like threw all that together. This is not like a put together office. That's like anything you don't see in the frame is garbage.
It's beautifully selected and placed with intention, shoved in the corner.
Yeah. So here we are. Here we go. Ending things on time. Go ahead, Cecil.
Oh, there's just a question for actually finishing anything. I think that's an interesting question to have in this because I think it actually works into finishing things on time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, what we're talking about, like we've talked about in the past, that awareness and attention are finite, right? And so some things are in there and some things are not. And finishing things and ending things on time, typically both of those things, if you're struggling with them, it's going to be about whether or not you're maintaining your attention or awareness on that thing or moving on to another thing. They're kind of the opposite ends of the spectrum a little bit, right? That part of the reason that you struggle to ever actually finish anything is because something new comes in and demands your attention and your awareness, and the thing that you've been working on gets kind of pushed out or lost. Whereas having trouble ending something on time, this came up because a lot of the coaches and myself have a hard time ending sessions on time, right? And our clients have been asking us questions about this too, especially anybody who works with people like we do, and you have like a specific slot or amount of time to be with somebody before you got to move on. That's oftentimes because whatever the next thing you're supposed to move on to is not coming into your attention or your awareness. And so it's all staying focused on the thing in front of you. It's kind of the eternal, I mean, it can be a lot of different things, but for me, it's very much often the eternal, like, if I just have 2 more minutes, I can do this better. Like if I just take another few minutes, like I just need one more sentence and surely I'll get it. But as soon as you say that, more things open up and then you want to keep going. Both of those things, finishing things and ending on time, tend to be a lot more of a struggle when you don't have a solid plan and when you don't have a solid system in place to help you to maintain your plans, when what you're doing is just whatever's coming up most urgently in your face at any given time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Especially if you're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
If I have 100 people that I'm trying to please and I can't please them all, well, who am I going to focus on is the one that's whoever is most in my awareness, which is there's some things that are more likely to be true about that. That's more likely to be somebody that I'm seeing physically. It's more likely to be somebody who is more comfortable with verbally, communicating to me their need for support. More likely to happen with people that I am closer with, have more of a relationship with. The more I think about somebody for whatever reason, the more likely it is that that's going to be the person that gets my attention. Coach is really good about keeping me accountable to time. Good, because I am terrible at it. No, we can talk about some specific strategies and things, but we always try and start off with more just an overview. Time management, people focus on it a lot. It tends really not to be about time, but more about energy and attention and awareness. Because, I don't know. I always think the phrase time management is funny because people don't actually mean I need to manage how I spend my time. You're spending time at a static rate that doesn't vary. You spend 1 second per second. It's what you're focusing on and what you're doing at any given moment that you're talking about, right? And I know that's what the phrase means, but it's just always funny to me because it makes it sound as though the time is the issue when it's the other three. So yeah, having external, or Bast Insider there said accountable, right? Accountability, we've talked about, well, maybe we haven't talked about it in the past. Here's how, for our purposes, I like to define accountability. It's just this. Is there somebody whose opinion of me matters to me, and that I think their opinion of me will be influenced by whether or not I do this thing? It doesn't matter if that person actually follows up with you. It doesn't matter whether they punish or reward you. It doesn't even matter necessarily whether you communicate to them that that's something that you were intending to do or not. But when you believe that there are other people whose opinions of you matter to you, and that those opinions will be shaped in part by what you do or don't do, that's what holds you accountable. We can't manage time to create another 24 hours in a day, no matter how much we want to. Yeah, absolutely. I wish. Ever since I was maybe you did this too, Cecil. When I was I'm going to say 7 or 8 years old, I would wish that I had the power to freeze time so that I could pause time and sleep and then unfreeze and wake up just to get the extra, however many hours.
Yeah. Or in school, I was terrible at doing homework. I never did homework, which was not great. But I was charming and always aced tests, so kind of loophole in that. And I always think right before they're oh, turn your homework in. I was if I could just freeze time now, I could just 2 minutes, I could get it all done, and boom, right in.
Of course, then it wouldn't actually happen. Because one of the things that we talk about, especially relevant today, is that whatever the reason that some problem is happening, so a very common accommodation in schools is to give extended time on tests or extended deadlines. But most of the time, if the reason that somebody is running out of time or using the whole time isn't assessed for and addressed, most of the time, the problem will expand to fit the time. You give them an extra half hour, then lo and behold, it's going to take them an extra half hour. You give them an extra week, it's going to take an extra week. I'm saying them, but it's me. Yeah, extra dimensional space where I could sleep. Yeah. I have vague memory of some very 80s-ish sitcom about a girl who's an alien or a robot or something and could freeze time and unfreeze it.
It was a sitcom, and she was an android.
Android, yeah. I wanted that one. That and then teleportation. Those were the two. But again, that was just
Nightcrawler is the best mutant. That's why.
No, not that. I need to teleport across the world, not just to the other side of the room.
It's a 2-mile radius, I believe. It's 5 miles, I forget. But whatever.
A sneak attack. We said we were going to talk about ending things on time. We're just going to talk about the best X-Men. Oh, I thought you were frozen there, Cecil. I was oh.
Just it's time. You did it. You froze time. Brandon found it out. No.
Bast Insider said up earlier that they talked with their coach in the first session about wanting to be respectful of the coach's time, but also having trouble taking a breath from talking. And yeah, I mean, it's not a secret. I reference it all the time, and you guys see how much I like to talk. Some of us, we rely more on other people's responses to things in order to make sense of the world. There's a concept we call perception checking or reality checking, where I am aware, and most people are aware of this to some extent, but how aware and how that varies from moment to moment obviously is different. I'm aware that my perception isn't the same as what is real. That I'm doing my best to figure out what's going on here, but that I am flawed and it won't be perfect. And so we use logic to solve for that, and we use checking with other people to solve for that. Just this morning, Cecil and I woke to some not upsetting news, but not happy news either, of one of our therapists moving on from the practice. And we just needed to talk through it with each other for, I don't know, an hour and a half. But not that there was anything we discussed in there. We did discuss like practical things that needed to be done. But mostly it's just getting those words out with somebody else there to watch their face and reaction and hear what they say, to be like, okay, good, I'm not crazy. So perception checking or reality checking is whatever thing you engage in order to check your perception against other people's perception or against what actually exists, just to like intentionally take some time. So yeah, when you're talking to somebody who's actually listening to you, because mostly we don't listen to each other, and I'm a really good listener. That's my whole job, I still am a crap listener when I'm not in session. It's exhausting to listen to somebody. So when we get that experience of somebody who's actually listening, it's like, okay, I need to tell you 8 million things. So yeah, it's hard to stop.
Oh yeah. And like that perception thing, talking about like, even with this comment here, being like respectful of time, and then, earlier with anxiety, it's just like, I constantly like, I say too much, too little, but I feel like that's a rabbit hole, so a rabbit trail or whatever.
Rabbit
like,
hole.
Oh, this is, yeah. I just feel like there's a lot of things that a lot of directions this can go in, because they all seem to be so related. Like a lot of these streams talk about, like, it's like not just one thing. It's not like, oh, here's a quick fix, just do this to be better about it. It's like, oh, this is impacted by this, and it's really like this, and it's understanding these concepts and how they all work together. And kind of like,
yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I was done. So
if this was all simple, we'd write a book and be done with it, Like there's a reason that we do one-on-one coaching and one-on-one therapy for so long. Oh, there's my dad's here. Yes, we are in our new offices. Father Fritz Tessers, great guy. And Bass Insider there, I have a backlog of so many thoughts. Here, have all of them. Yeah, that's really, a lot of the time, honestly, speaking as a therapist who is not, I don't always go back to people's childhoods, like the stereotype tends to be. In fact, generally speaking, I only do that if there's a good reason for it. But a lot of times clients want to do that because it's just unprocessed thoughts that you've been carrying around forever. And it's not like there's anything to do about it except just finally have somebody listen to you talk about it and just check your perception against theirs. Like, that was unreasonable, right? Like what that person did was bad, right? Or what I did was good, or even though I messed up, like, it's understandable. You just need someone to hear and say, yeah, oh, okay, cool, good. And it goes away. Sometimes, not always.
So this little off, but so earlier today, like I had I'll just put it up here, just because it's really little time. But I had accommodations in school for more time because I needed more than 40 hours to memorize 50 pages of content for quizzes, converting work memory to long-term memory, all that fun stuff. Yeah, so like that's a little bit different than like earlier we were talking about, like if we're given more time, then we're just gonna spend more time as we had already spent the time we were given. And so like, that's a little bit of a different thing.
Well, it can be, but not necessarily. The more time accommodations, think of it like painkillers, right? That pain serves a purpose, right? That's your body's message saying, I don't know why this is like the default example, but I feel like it is, your hand on a stove. That is the body's way of saying, change this because whatever you're doing is going to cause you long-term damage. You need to address this, And so painkillers are great when you know what's going on and when you're addressing it and taking care of it, because the pain is no longer functional. So if you have already been burned and you are in the process of healing and it's still hurting and whatever, then yeah, let's give you some painkillers because we're already doing everything that needs to be done. So accommodations often are the same. Not always. Some accommodations are in and of themselves the solution, but some accommodations are more like, let's lessen how bad this is while we do the things that we need to do to make it better, right? And extended time usually tends to be one of those. So what matters is what's really being addressed. In other words, you know what the better accommodation would have been, and of course I'm making a lot of leaps here, for pond circles, is to not make you memorize 50 pages of content for quizzes rather than just give you extra time. It's like, here's this awful and useless thing, because a little note, it's not in your long-term memory. I'm guessing it might be. But if I were to ask you right now about that information, it's not there, which means it didn't go to long-term memory. You were, and this is usually true, especially for neurodivergent people, overcompensating with working memory. That a lot of us are really good at memorizing entire chapters of a textbook, going and acing the test, and then literally later that night could not tell you what any of the stuff was that I memorized for the test earlier. So really, you said earlier, you're charming and you're good at tests, Cecil, and I mean, me too, and that's a lot of us. That's how a lot of us, for those people who are neurodivergent and yet still get through school, you know, somewhat successfully by traditional standards, you know, grades and whatever, usually it's some combination of those two things.
Yeah.
That we're good at tests and we're charming and people will give us good grades because we ask them to. So anyway, yeah, you didn't commit this stuff to your long-term memory. All they did was made you jump through hoops to commit 50 pages of content to your short-term memory, your working memory, which crowded out anything else. So you couldn't focus on anything else or do anything else for that 48 hours or however long you had until you took the test. And the reason for retaining that information, the problem that that information was meant to help you solve, is resolved, and then the information is lost because it's no longer necessary. So yeah, the better accommodation would just be to say, let's find a different way of assessing you and be exhausted for it, yeah. Rather than just saying, okay, we're going to keep the same crappy assessment, but we're going to ask you to focus on it for even longer than we are already asking you to focus on it. And if they had given you another 24 hours, you would have spent that other 24 hours too, because you're not going to remember it all perfectly. So you're taking as much time as you have to do as much, get as close as you can. But for that entire time, your working memory isn't available for other stuff. Everything else goes missing. And like Kitchquatch says, you're exhausted. Now, that's not always true, but a lot of times.
So let's say this person, so because there's a lot of things in our world that like we just have to do. Like it's unfortunate there's things like, you know, school, for instance, like a lot of people have to just, they have to find a way of getting through it. So if we're setting this task and we got, you know, we're not able to get the accommodations to get that extended time for whatever reason, we have to memorize this page. How then do we like make sure that, you know, how do we approach that as like a time management kind of thing? Like how do we know that we end that task on time, or, you know, if that makes sense. Some of those words came out right.
Yeah, so ending things on time is a bit of a paradox, because if what you're doing is judging when it's time to move on to the next thing by the time, that's arbitrary. I'm not explaining this well. Give me an example of like a specific thing people have trouble ending on time.
Anything fun. Anything that like holds my attention, I have a hard time ending on time. I mean, this stream, for instance, we have a hard time sometimes. It's like, oh, it's 2 o'clock. I have my little alarms to make sure. It was like 2 minutes late on ending that one.
Okay, yeah, well, let's talk about the stream then, because yeah. Or like literally Cecil was putting on that shirt like as we were launching the stream because we were pushing, and we launched the stream a minute late today, which we're usually very like specific about. So the brain gets rewarded upon task completion. I think we've talked in the past. There's 2 ways to get energy restored through doing something. One is what we call enjoyment or fun or whatever, that feeling in and of itself is basically a synonym for this is energizing. I am being restored in some way, right? The other is to complete things. So defining when a thing is complete is important, because that's when the brain says, okay, cool. Not only am I able to then put this away, go back to that memorizing the information in working memory, right? Once the test is complete, then the brain can say, okay, don't need it anymore, it's gone. Until that test is complete, I'm going to hold that information and there will be less room, or other things will need to be more important or more urgent to come in, right? if we define completion, if we're not clear on like defining when a task is complete, we tend to default back to time. I'll be done in an hour. I'll be done in a week, right? Rather than looking at the specific criteria of whatever the task is. And now sometimes that is all we have because the task doesn't have a definable completion, right? That if I just enjoy, for example, like I used to play League of Legends a lot. If I just enjoy playing League of Legends, well, yes, a game completes upon certain criteria, but then I can just start another game. So my playing League of Legends, or as you're saying, Cecil, anything enjoyable or fun, doesn't have a completion. It just means that there are other things I need to get done that are also important, so I have to stop. Or the other way I would put it is you stop enjoying it, you get bored of it eventually, which is really more about energy depletion in our terminology, but that's another thing. So in this stream, our goal is to help, is to chat with people, is to make ourselves available, especially for people who, for whatever reason, like one-on-one coaching or therapy isn't a good fit for, whether that's like resources or whatever other reason, right? We want to help people. Now, that's an uncompletable goal because it's way too vague, right? So there will never come a time in this stream where we say, okay, done. Like, let's move on to the next thing. We did it. We helped. There's always more that could be done. So then we have to default to saying, okay, we're limiting it based on time, which means we're not actually completing it. We just have to remember that there are other important things that also need to be done. So we have to stop this even though it doesn't feel complete. When we're talking about having trouble ending things on time, it is always that. It is always, I don't feel as though this is complete. So I have to force myself to stop and shift over to something else because something else is important, even though this isn't done. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what about things that are like can be done? Like Kitch Squatch here has this comment. It says that today I had an appointment and I stopped working to get ready. Then I thought I had extra time to prepare dinner in advance and was late to the dentist. So it's like these are things that look like they have like distinguishing like stopping points, right?
Right. So that first sentence right there, I had an appointment, I stopped working to get ready. Great. That's what we were just talking about, where work, whatever Kitch Squatch is doing for work, it doesn't have a definable endpoint. Or if it does have a definable endpoint, it hasn't been defined. Some things are indefinable, some things are definable, and we just haven't done whatever is necessary to do, or others haven't done whatever is necessary to do to make that clear. Does that distinction make sense?
Yeah.
So working is just a thing. When I stop working based on time and then I get back to work based on time tomorrow, right? So that's that first, and right there you see it, right? I stopped working because I had an appointment. If it's based on time and not completion, we stop because something else is important. Now, whatever getting ready means there, and I know I'm making a lot of guesses, Kitch Squatch, so please tell me if any of this is wrong. But whatever getting ready is there, based on the way you're phrasing this, it sounds like you thought, it'll take me 20 minutes to get ready, so I got to stop 20 minutes early, but then it ended up actually taking 10 minutes to get ready. So now I have this 10 extra minutes. What can I squeeze in here? Is that something like what happened? I don't know if there's a delay. I don't know if
there is the chats like our broadcast is a few seconds behind the chat.
Okay. This is the first time I've ever asked chat like a specific question and waited for the answer. Yes, Kitch Squatch says so. Good. All right. So you estimated that something would take longer than it actually ended up taking. That's a good thing. I would rather have extra time than not enough time, right? But then the next thing happens. Okay, I have the extra 10 minutes. What do I want to spend the extra 10 minutes on? And now the second decision came. For whatever reason, whatever options you thought through, you arrived on, oh, let me prepare dinner in advance. That's something that will take 10 minutes. And obviously ended up taking more than 10 minutes. So you overestimated how long it would take to get ready, underestimated how long it would take to prepare dinner in advance, or at least whatever elements of that task that you were doing. And then we're late for the dentist. And I'm going to guess, and tell me if this is right or not, I'm going to guess you did not complete preparing dinner in advance, that you stopped preparing dinner, not because you finished it, but because you realized that you were running late for the dentist and had to go. Is that true or no? We got to have like a countdown clock for how long before you can hear and respond, or just like a quick little.
Well, let's go down both avenues. That like,
I just prepared a few things. There you go. So again, you took on another task, prepare dinner in advance. That does have a definable and a defined endpoint, right? You knew what things you needed to get done, and once those things were done, you'd say, good, I prepared dinner in advance, right? But those things took more than 10 minutes. And so at a certain point, you stopped, not because you were completed, but because for whatever reason, it came into your awareness that you were running late for the dentist and you had to go. Because it is inherently dissatisfying to leave something unresolved, uncompleted. So to force yourself or to force somebody else to leave a task before it's completed, there has to be a reason for that. Something else has to be important. And getting to the dentist on time is important, but getting to the dentist 5 minutes late instead of 20 minutes late is like a lot more important, or however much more subjectively important it is to a certain person, right? Like here, I'll do, and I apologize because I don't know if this will work for non-Americans, and I know that we have at least some non-Americans here, but this is my default example I use to illustrate this. Watch what's about to happen. It may happen for everybody, but it definitely will happen for the Americans. And I'm telling you that it's going to happen, and it's still going to happen anyway. Watch what's about to happen to your brain when I do this. 648 321 47. You see, you feel that stuckness. Everybody's thinking some version of, okay, what am I supposed to do with these numbers? What is it that what are these numbers for? Am I supposed to remember these numbers? Do you want me to complete these numbers for you, right? So what just happened there is the brain only pays attention to two things. We've talked about this in the past, either problems or data that for whatever reason it believes might be relevant to solving problems now or in the future, right? Now, because you all who are here, you know, the way that this is all set up for us to talk, you know, that Cecil and I are given the platform, and theoretically there's at least some trust or value there. You wouldn't be here in the first place. So because I said those numbers, there's an inherent value, and your brain is saying, okay, this is supposed to be relevant for some reason. Until you can determine what that reason is, the brain is not going to let go and move on. It's going to say, I did this once very recently with a client, and their response was like, usually I get a response of something like, what am I supposed to do with these numbers? Or do you want me to say, am I supposed to remember? This client recently was like, because I pick random numbers every time. My brain is buzzing. Yeah, actually, that is a really good way to describe that feeling. I think it's in anything. So perception is data compression. That there is way too much, even just if I was just looking at this part of my screen that contains the image of Cecil in his office, right? There is way too much data, just visual data in that small space for my brain to actually pay attention to every single detail. It cannot. So instead, it has to match against a perception set and say, oh, that's Cecil. And my brain was going, obviously he's citing a jingle from an ad. Have I heard this ad? Yeah, I like that. See, all of us were trying to solve the problem. We needed to, because until it was resolved, part of what was happening, if I asked you now, most of you probably couldn't say what the numbers were unless you came up with some kind of mnemonic or reason on your own. But at the time, until I said what was going on, your brain, among other things, was trying to hold on to those numbers because I might need them again. How long am I supposed to remember? And remembering those means 4-7. Good. Oh, I didn't finish the story. Yeah, this client recently, I make up numbers every time, and this client recently was like, okay, the first three numbers were 6, 3, 9, and I know that because 6 plus 3 equals 9, and I was trying to combine the numbers in different ways and see if there was some pattern, which, yeah, that's logic, that's intelligence. It's okay, I'm getting what is essentially random data because the world is random and chaotic. Meaning and order and structure don't really exist. They exist in our mind, but that's probably way far afield for what we're doing today. We need meaning, we need pattern, we need structure in order to be able to walk around without being completely overwhelmed all the time. You try to make sense of it. Absolutely. That's what we're talking about. It is data compression. It's what language is about. It's what intelligence is about. Anything that you are consciously doing involves data compression. And in part, it involves making an assessment of what elements of the data are valuable and need to be retained, because I have finite space, so I need to only carry some of it, and what parts of the data are not valuable and therefore I can let go of and throw away. And if I ever need it in the future, I can just make it up again and it doesn't matter. So go ahead, Cecil.
There's, I forget their first name, he's a linguist, Prinker, talks a lot about that with just like sounds in different languages and like how that all those things are either filled in or affected. And Ray Kurzweil, an AI theorist and philosopher, also talk about computers, their inability to disregard information is like what makes them less than intelligent.
Yeah, well, you and I have talked about this theory before, and I think that is fascinating and interesting. What is really interesting to me is the implication that people are different from computers in this way, when I don't believe that we actually are. We're taught what's important by perception checking, by saying, okay, I remembered this part of it, that's the relevant part, right? And then someone else being like, nope, that caused a problem. And then I'm like, damn it, okay, I gotta. So essentially we're being programmed to determine what is valuable and what is not by everybody we interact with at all times. But again, we're getting really like far deep into philosophy and stuff.
Yeah, I like this. This is like the conversation I want to go with, but yeah, you're right. We need to bring that down.
So back to ending things on time, right? Completion. What you're doing there is, if I had done the same thing, and I don't remember the numbers, but if I had done the same thing like this, watch how different it is. And of course, we know it now too. Yeah, perception check, roll a d20. We both have D&D. Actually, if my dad is still here, oh no, he's not. He said dinner.
I'm pointing at it as if it's my
He gave me that.
From one of our campaigns.
From our D&D campaign. But anyway, what was I saying? See, ADHD.
I'm distracted by the DD comment. Anything
Watch, I'll do this again, and obviously we know more about it, but still pay attention to what happens differently. If I say 478-291-3842, notice the cadence and the pitch goes down, and as soon as I complete it, again, at least with the Americans, I'm not sure with anybody else. Oh, Fritz is still here. My dad's still here. Yeah, that's your barrel up there that you gave me. That as soon as it's resolved, then your brain can immediately say, okay, that's a phone number. And I don't need to remember the numbers, because presumably if it's a phone number that matters to me, Brandon will tell me why it matters later, and I can ask it again or write it down or whatever. You drop it almost immediately. So we need that resolution in order to move forward. So with these tasks that don't have a defined completion that we can monitor for and know when we're done, the only way we stop is because something else becomes more important, even though this is still important to us by default. Because it is unresolved and because we're aware of it, it is by definition in our awareness. Something else has to be more urgent or more important to say stop, even though you don't want to stop, and move on to this other thing. So,
this is really interesting because this reminds me a lot of when we talked a while ago about procrastination and perfectionism. It's like that similar concept.
Yeah.
Where like, like you're there, like if you don't have that definable stop, you just keep going, and like, understanding tasks, length.
Ending things on time is just perfectionistic, or not being able to end things on time is perfectionistic behavior, but it is in a specific context. So when we talk about perfectionism in and of itself, if I spend 3 weeks working on an essay where it's not really necessary for me to do that, that's perfectionism. But if there were other things I was supposed to be doing with that 3 weeks, and I said, no, I'm still going to focus on this, then we talk about it more in terms of ending it on time. But yeah, it's the same thing. You need to know when you're done. The brain needs to say, this problem is resolved, and or whatever this information is that I'm aware of is no longer necessary or relevant to whatever problems I thought it might be relevant to. That's when the brain can let go of information and move on. The only other way that the brain will move on from information is if other more urgent stuff pops up.
Okay, so go back to this example here with like, you have the appointment for for I assume the dentist. So you're like, cool, I got to plan my day for that. So like that's the thing that I'm making more urgent, even if it isn't. I'm building into my schedule. and knowing that I need to stop here to have this time, and also I've got extra time, and so I'm going to fill it up with here. So in this, what are practical things that we could do in this example here to have not been late for the dentist?
Good. I like that question. And Kitchquatch asked the same thing at the same time. How do you do that? I'm adjusting. Oh, I'm sitting. Okay. So we're going to focus first on that second case. So if it is a theoretically definable goal that you just haven't defined, define it, and we'll come back. But let's say that for whatever reason, whether it is definable or not, you just don't have a way to measure whether it's complete intrinsically. And so you are having to just stop because the time has come to stop and move on to the next thing. What you have to know is the brain, the whole point is that when something is unresolved, it's spending a lot, as much as it can spare of your awareness is being spent on the task at hand. Does that make sense? So you have to build in things, preferably external things, and we'll get some specific recommendations there. But if not external things, then you have to do some work in defining in advance how important it is that you move on to the next thing by what time or what time or what time. Meaning, the reason that you were late to the dentist, regardless of any of the practical things we're about to talk about what reminders and things you can use and etc., is because for whatever reason, you believe that even though it is nice to be on time, it is not necessary. But at a certain point, you became aware of it because even though it's also still nice to be this late instead of later, at a certain point, your brain is saying, no, I'm going to miss the window completely. I have to go. It's too much, right? And that line is arbitrary. But we can define those things and shape them preemptively, right? That it can matter if, for example, your dentist said to you, listen, if you arrive 1 minute after your appointment next time, I'm not going to be able to see you. Or if you'd shown up late and the dentist had said sorry and sent you home, then next time you're going to be a lot more likely to be on time to the dentist because the level of importance there is bigger, so the brain will judge it differently. Now, is that perfect? No. And the problem that I have with that generally is that it feeds into this idea that being late is disrespectful, that I don't care as much about your time as about my own, which it's not. It's not that I don't care about your time, it's that whatever other things I was focused on or was doing were for whatever reason being judged to be more important in that moment, even though I care very much about your time. But I wasn't thinking about your time at that point because I was trying to resolve something so I could come across. So you can define those. Now, I don't like having it by, like Kitchquatch says, there are consequences, like somebody else saying, I'm really upset, therefore it's more important, because that is basically just punishment, and punishment is terrible. It will change behavior, but not usually in the way that you want it to.
Yep.
But we can do that for ourselves ahead of time to say, even if I didn't set any external things, if you had set intention earlier in the day to say, okay, how important is it to me to be on time to the dentist, right? Because if you had thought through that and if you had decided for whatever reason that it is very important, that it is highly valuable, then when you had those extra 10 minutes, it's more likely that your brain, the decision you would have come to is, oh, well, then I'll just leave 10 minutes early and arrive 10 minutes early. Cool. As opposed to whatever it was that actually happened. But let's get to the stuff that I think everybody is mostly here for, the practical suggestions. And you're going to notice patterns because there are always patterns. Make it external. Make it happen through whatever means you most pay attention to. For me, more than anything, what I pay attention to is social data more than anything else. If somebody tells me it's time to go, I'll go, right? Does that make sense? So I utilize that. And Cecil knows this about me, that, I need messages and reminders. Sometimes like, hey, you got to move on, and that'll hit me. But different types of sensory data hit you differently too. So the default everyone's going to be thinking of is auditory reminders. I don't know how to do this. That is like my phone, using your phone. Setting alarms and things like that. And that is great. And we can come back to some specific recommendations about that. But if you've been trying that and it doesn't work, a lot of people humans are really good at generalizing, which can be great and can be terrible. So if I try and set reminders and they don't work for me, then I'm likely to just say, oh, setting external reminders doesn't work. Instead of being granular and saying, setting external auditory reminders, or even this specific audible reminder didn't work, let me try a different reminder. So just some quick things that people might not think of quite as much. Visual reminders, and ADHD people especially get this advice, I feel like pretty frequently, at least in ADHD circles, of using visual timers, using hourglasses, using light up timers where the light increases or decreases or whatever. I utilize, my wife and I were working on trying to get to the bedroom earlier, get to sleep earlier. And so I now have programmed my lights to turn off at 10 p.m. Do I have to go to bed right away? No, but it's a pretty clear sign to me that it's 10 o'clock. And either I can choose to turn the lights back on, but then I'm making a decision to turn the lights back on, or I'm going to sit there in the dark, which makes it less valuable for me to stay out in the front room or whatever, right? Tactile reminders. This is a big one because it is pretty accessible for a lot of people. It does require resources, but not an exorbitant amount of resources necessarily. But watches that buzz, smart watches that buzz, right? That if you set timers and reminders that buzz on you, that you might notice that a lot more than you notice auditory reminders.
It reminds me of those things at restaurants. They're like waiting. It's like, like, yeah. It's like, oh, they have the light up and they have the buzz, and it's like, yeah.
Just thinking about restaurants is like remembering college or something. It's like, oh, I remember restaurants. I don't know good ways to do this with smell or with taste or with vestibular or kinesthetic or whatever senses, but experiment. And then with the default, the auditory reminders, here are some real quick and easy, like practical things to do. They're very quick and easy to implement. They're not necessarily easy to think of in the first place. I will oftentimes take a portion of a session or even a whole session to go with clients and set up their alarms and their phone and how they're using it. So I'll just give you the quick rundown of my recommendations there. Number one, go into your phone and opt out of all push notifications. Don't look at which ones you need or don't need. Opt out of them all. There used to be one switch that you could turn that would do that, and then they wised up and made it so you have to go through and do it to each individual one. After you do that, then you can go back and look at which ones you want to turn on. But with every single one, the question is this: do I want to think about this app when I don't want to think about this app? I know that's worded a little weirdly, so I'll explain it. But do I want to think about this app when I don't want to think about this app? The point of a push notification is you are aware, your attention and awareness are being spent on other things, and I am calling you back to me. So there are some things we want that for and some things we don't. I, for example, do want to know when I get a text, right? I don't want to have to keep thinking, ooh, I should check my texts, and I only see them whenever I think to check on them. I want them to tell me when they're there. Same with my calendar, same with my email, whatever. I do not ever, and this is just me, everyone's different, I'm not judging, want a game on my phone to ask me to think about it when I wouldn't otherwise think about it. Your whole job, game, is just to be for fun. Like, I will pay attention to you when I feel like paying attention to you. Don't try and get my attention otherwise, right? Quick side note there, Bast Insider says that they'll talk to friends for hours, but then hear that exact tone when a friend is getting ready to go. Or physical cues, right? Aaron, Cecil's partner and my good friend, when he's down at a restaurant, he just stands up. And it's real weird, but it's very clear. And even if you want to stay, it becomes pretty costly to stay at the restaurant when one member of your party is standing by the side of the table. Like, no matter how much you want to stay, sooner or later you're gonna be like, okay, we gotta go. This is uncomfortable. That makes it really easy for Bast Insider, I don't want to say her, them to wrap things up. Puts her purse on our lap. Yeah, all these cues. You guys are talking about, like me, social data. I'm relying on other people to cue me when it's time to move on. And that is often the case when we're doing something enjoyable, right? It's like, if it was up to me, I would keep doing this forever. I'm only going to stop because other people, external things, are telling me it's time to move on to other stuff. And some of this changes too, depending on how your sequencing is. The weirdest thing I've ever heard. I don't even know which thing I said that is the weirdest thing that you've ever heard, but.
We see a lot of weird things, so it's like.
Oh, she, her. Good. Okay. I got all distracted again. I like keep doing this thing where I'm like
social cues. So we talk about alarms, signals off, and notifications.
Right. Back to the phone. Okay. Opt out of everything, then you can go back and opt in. But whatever thing that you are using to be your alarm, personally, I use Google Calendar. I like Google Calendar because it combines planners and reminders and alarms. And most calendar apps will do that, but experiment with which one works best for you. And remember, people will tell me all the time, oh, I don't use calendars. I've tried calendars, they don't work. Different calendars are different. Don't generalize into, I tried this calendar, therefore no calendar will ever work for me. Even that one calendar that didn't work for you in the past might work for you now because you're different and the circumstances are different and things have changed. Now, I'm not going to say, me, I don't like try that again harder. But it's like if it's something that you tried 15 years ago, it might be worth trying again. If it's something you tried 2 days ago, no, let's move on to something new, the standing up at a restaurant. Yeah, that is weird. I don't know I don't know how much of it he's doing like consciously and intentionally as a signal to people, or if that's just how he, without consciously deciding it, he moves,
It's like,
okay, opt out, opt in on the ones you want. Whatever thing you're using to manage your time or give you reminders that it's time to move on, choose a different notification sound for that app than you use for everything else. For me, my general notification is a lightsaber sound. My notification for my calendar is Na'vi from Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time going, hey, listen, which when Cecil and I were setting up that room, he heard. And what was my immediate response? Do you remember?
Odd time for this to go off. Like, oh, what's going on?
He said, what is I'm supposed to be going to?
Yeah.
Because as soon as it goes off, to me, that means in 10 minutes, I'm supposed to do something. And it was 12:35. And I knew that the stream didn't start until 1. I had forgotten that I put the stream in at 12:45 in my calendar so that, if I'm, at home, for example, getting lunch, I have time to get back to the office and get set up or whatever. Because it is a different sound and I only hear it when it's time for me to get ready to move and transition onto something else, I give myself 10 minutes, which is for me enough time. It's also the default, but it's a default for a reason. It tends to work for a lot of people. For me, it's enough time that whatever I'm currently doing, I have time to wrap it up and prepare to transition without feeling like, oh God, I got to go right now. But not so much time that in my head I can say, oh yeah, I got that thing in 20 minutes, but don't worry, we got plenty of time. And then I can forget about it.
Well, then you end up doing what happened earlier where oh, I've got extra time. Let me do something else with it. And then next thing you know, you're running late for the thing that you were planning the whole time.
Well, and same thing happened with us. We were a minute late for the stream, in part at least because my thing went off at 12:35. And rather than saying, okay, I got to start wrapping up and switching now, it's, oh, I got time. And then I move on and forget about it. And my awareness goes back to what I'm doing. So a different sound for the alarm. Also choose a sound that you will notice. And I tell people usually to pick a sound that will wake you up even if you're asleep. So, because a lot of times people will fall asleep and miss something, especially neurodivergent people and especially ADHD people tend to have trouble with sleeping at night and are exhausted all the time. I mean, all are exhausted all the time mostly. And we'll just randomly fall asleep. So, but then the criteria changes. If I'm picking a noise that's going to wake me up, I better only put alarms in here that are worth being woken up for. Otherwise, I'll be pissed, right? Yeah. So that's specific. I focus more on the auditory because that's what most people start with as a default. But remember, you can switch to other things. In particular, like I said, the tactile reminder tends to work for a lot of people. The watch, because it's portable, you can use the same apps to program it. It's just a different input. Whereas visual timers can be great, but tend to only work when you know what physical environment you're going to be in, because they're hard to kind of bring around with you. I was on the ADHD Rewired podcast a little while back, and Eric Tivers, who hosts that, when you get on Zoom with him, he's got in the camera view probably 3 or 4 different physical timers, and then also on screen a digital clock counting the time. And I'm sure that a lot of that is for him to help remind himself of when he needs to wrap up, but it definitely also is a lot for his guests or clients or whomever he's talking to be like, notice the passage of time. The more that you give your brain, did I just close? No.
Nope, you're still here.
Okay. The more you get, that's where you learn about effective artistry. Cool. The more you give your brain reason to pay attention to something, sometimes we know why we pay attention to things. There's meaning attached, right? Like, oh, that thing is important to me because blank, blank, blank. Sometimes we don't know why, like especially with what we call sensory sensitivities. What we're usually saying is, for whatever reason, my brain prioritizes data that comes in that form. And I don't know why, and it seems to be generally but you don't need to know why. You just need to know that it happens and say, okay, well, then I'm going to use it. If sounds bother me, I'll use sound to get myself to do something, And man, there's I just wanted to go off on another thing about sensory sensitivities and how they're usually talked about in terms of deficiency or problems, like, oh, I'm getting overwhelmed. But that actually the flip side is also true as well, that you are better equipped to get into the nuance of those things, because all we mean is that you're prioritizing that data. You're more sensitive to that data the way that an instrument is sensitive or granular. Anyway, some practical advice there.
So they're setting alarms, and then different things for that, and like obviously like with everything that you want to try it out, see if it works. If it doesn't, reevaluate, readjust. But what about we talked a lot about like social cues too. What if like because I don't know when to end things. I'm not always great at that. Sometimes I miss social cues, and yeah. And so what about someone like me who would be like, if I'm going off of social cues, when do I'm going to miss a lot of those. Like, what would I do in that situation?
Don't use social cues. Use something else. Because the whole point, at least 3 of us, 2 people in chat and me, are talking about being very sensitive to social cues just generally, but especially when especially when it's like somebody else wanting something to be over. Because we don't ever want to get into that where we're doing something or being somebody that the other person doesn't want around. We hate that so much, right? Now you might hate that too, but just miss the cues for whatever reason. Because remember, it's not all about value. There are other things that determine what you notice. But if you notice, or if you know about yourself that social cues are not a very reliable way for you to be able to make this determination, the solution isn't to just convince yourself to be better at noticing social cues. The solution is to use something that does work for you. And of course, like we always talk about, you can change the self, the environment, or the way that they interact. But getting better at noticing social cues is changing the self. Now you can get specific and make things clearly definable rather than a vague sense, like Baston Sider said earlier, of like, oh, they use that tone, right? But then Kid Squatch said, my mom puts her purse on her lap, or we said Aaron stands up at the restaurant. Some cues are very easily and observable. So you can teach yourself that, but that's learning a new language. That's more worthwhile when it's going to be somebody like Aaron that you interact with all the time. It's not about you learning to read social cues, because everyone's cues are different.
Yeah.
So use other things. This is
Okay. Oh, sorry. I say that's why I start with them, is because like I just go, is that the social cue? Is that the social cue? Is that one? Is that one? Is that one? And so I'm always thinking, as soon as I start, that's a social cue to like leave. So I'm just like,
well, that's why we always come back to authenticity and communication, right? Because you could theoretically ask that every time. I'm sorry, I just picked up that maybe you want to wrap up, but I'm not sure. Can you tell me? I saw you do this thing or heard you say that thing. I'm trying to learn. And again, that's going to work better in some situations than in others. And it's an intensive process and a vulnerable process. So you're only going to want to do it with people that you feel safe with and that are, really important to you. But otherwise, use other things. There's a reason that like politeness, for example, manners, which we don't necessarily talk about this that much or how weird it is, that they are actually defined and written codes that have been disseminated to people. We talk about them as unwritten rules usually. Why are you sighing the whole time? Is that a real question? Is one of us sighing a lot? I haven't been picking that up. Or do you mean like theoretically? I'm curious now if that's like theoretically something you could say to somebody when you're thinking they might want you to leave. Say, why are you sighing a lot? Or if we've been sighing, I haven't noticed it, so I'm fascinated now. It's like the incomplete phone number. I'm like, oh, now I need to know what that is. A question to ask a friend. Good. Now I can move on. Got to backtrack. Oh yeah, use other things. So manners and being polite or whatever. There are actual books about this stuff. My dad, if he's still here, there were times like when I was young that he would take me to a restaurant and like specifically train me. Okay, this is how you do this thing, and you use that fork for this thing, and you order this way, and you eat this that way, and Europeans do it like this, but America's. And I thought it was super weird. I still think it's super weird, but it's a neurodivergent dad of a neurodivergent son, even if he didn't have that language to think of it that way. Like for us, it was just kind of like a fun, jokey activity, but obviously there's something underneath that of like, why would you think about it even as a fun, jokey activity if you didn't think there was some meaning in or some value in it, So these unwritten rules, which are getting less and less reliable. This is a true story about Cecil, what I'm about to say. For years in his apartment, when you opened the door, the first thing that you saw, how they get those banners where you can like put letters together and spell out like happy birthday or whatever? When you opened the front door, the first thing you saw was a banner that said, please leave by 9. Which again, just like my dad teaching me, manners at the restaurant is a jokey, like, haha, oh, Cecil, he doesn't like socializing with people kind of thing. And also very clear and authentic and honest communication of not that you actually always want people to leave by 9, but that you do want people to be aware of that you might not be so great at communicating when you want them to leave, and you need them to be aware of it. So the sign helps with that. There's a reason that those books exist, but yes, they are becoming less reliable. So you can come up with your own rules, or like, this thing. When I do this, it means rescue me or we got to leave, so that you can communicate steadily with whoever you're there with, right? But yeah, just if reading social cues doesn't work for you, then do something else, or make a very clear. It's like I can say I don't speak Spanish, and yet there are many Spanish words that I know. Same kind of thing. You may not be fluent in reading an individual's social cues, which is just their language, their communication, but you can learn specific elements of it. And then the more you learn, the more fluent you get for that person. But it does generalize, just like language, right? You learn a second language, learning a third one is easier, especially if it shares some roots. So make pre-written rules. And especially right now, I think we were talking some about this on the stream last week. Everybody needs to refigure things out socially, ending things on time, right? Back to social stuff again this week. I didn't even track that. Navigate that and negotiate that in advance. I know it's awkward. I know it feels weird to be the person saying like, can we talk about like how long this is going to be, or how much money we're all okay with spending tonight, or whatever. But if you do it, be explicit, authentic, and clear in your communication. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck guessing. Because again, back to that phone number, it's the lack of certainty, or Cecil, what you and I experienced this morning. It's the lack of certainty that is the problem, because the brain cannot move on until it has an answer. Even in cases where either answer is equally fine to you, you need to know which one it is to move on. Otherwise, you're going to still be focused on it. Thank you, Kit Squatch, for the social cue, because I do have to go. I really appreciate that. Look at that. Utilizing what we're talking about. I'm going to do
Nice.
Bye, everybody.
Well, thank you guys again for joining us here at This Is Not Therapy Hour. We'll be here every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. Feel free to check us out on Twitter and Instagram at EF_artistry. Check out our website. Feel free to contact us with any questions you guys have, or just want to engage with us, because people. So hopefully we guys catch you guys next week. You guys have a wonderful week.